I don't think there's any car that did more damage to a manufacturer than the Bitter did to Lancia. And what's baffling is that it was actually a brilliant car, probably the best in its class. Most will tell you that the problem was rust, whereas in fact it was something else entirely. In this video I'll explain what really happened, and of course we'll take it for a drive and we'll find out just what makes it so good. The Lancia Y has just been launched and apparently it's not a bad car. But to me, it's just a Peugeot 208 in a Lancia costume. Really, a pastiche of what a Lancia could be. This, on the other hand, was supposed to be Lancia's bright new beginning. The first model developed entirely under Fiat stewardship and meant to show the world just what Lancia could do. To prove just how good the concept was, let's compare it to one of the world's acknowledged greats, the first BMW 5 Series. The E12 launched a year after the Bitter, and yet the Lancia was lighter, roomier, more advanced and much cheaper. It used the legendary Fiat twin-cam engine, which compared well with the BMW single-cam units. This 1.4, for example, made 90 horsepower, the same as BMW's 1.8 litre. And the Lancia 1.8 outguns BMW 2 litre with 118 horsepower. And don't forget, the Bitter was 140 kilos lighter than the 5 Series. Yes, the 6-cylinder BMWs that followed outperformed the Lancia, but they also cost an awful lot more. The Bitter also had rack and pinion steering, a 5-speed gearbox, independent suspension and disc brakes all round. All of which made the BMW's worm and roller steering, 4-speed gearbox and rear drum brakes look old-fashioned. While front-wheel drive might seem like a downside now, in the 70s it was considered innovative, and it allowed the Bitter to be roomier inside than the larger BMW. Fiat really wanted this to mark a new era for Lancia, even down to the names. Instead of using Roman roads like the Aurelia or the Flavia, they decided to go back to the Greek alphabet, just like the very first Lancias. And it wasn't just one car either. The Bitter spawned an entire range. The Trevi 3-box Saloon, a sharp 2+2 coupe, the Pininfarina designed Spider, which was built by Zagato, the HPE Sporty Estate, and even the Monte Carlo mid-engine sports car. At launch, the Bitter was a runaway success, lauded by public and journalists alike. It was the fastest selling Lancia of all time. But the honeymoon didn't last. Within a few years, stories started circulating that the Bitter suffered from a serious flaw. The problem was located right here. The engine subframe at the back where the mounts were was prone to rust because of a design issue. This meant that the engine would drop a couple of inches and the car would then fail its MOT. This caused a scandal which was eventually picked up by the UK media. Britain was Lancia's biggest market at that time, and this caused irreparable damage. But that story is not quite as straightforward as it may seem. Let's take it out. I'll tell you more about what really went wrong and about how this car drives today. Now, before we head off, just a couple of words on this particular car. First of all, the condition. Now, this has been owned since 1981 by Fred. The mileage on it is 69,000, and that is original miles. So this really is a time capsule. It's so rare to find one of these, let alone an unrestored one. It's amazing that it's lasted this long. It does show quite a lot of wear, but then again, because it hasn't been fixed up, it's quite nice to know exactly what it does look like. The other thing is, it's a 1.4. It's the real lowest poverty spec car, and some of you may have raised your eyebrows because I was comparing it to a 5 Series, but this, although really a little bit of a class below, is also a class above the 3 Series. So although the 5 Series was a more expensive car, the fact that this technically matched it and surpassed it in many ways just shows you how special these things were. Now, let's get going. That Fiat engine feels special even from when you just switch it on. It's so free revving, so light, the throttle's really light, everything feels good. goes into gear positively, so let's set off. Now the clutch is really, really long on this. It takes up high. I don't know if that's the way that they were or if it's this particular car. I wouldn't be surprised if it was still on the original clutch, if it had been driven gently enough. Now I'm going to give you a few driving impressions first, and then we'll go back to talking about what happened with that infamous rust issue and what I think that the real problem was. So when they first came out, what everybody said is that they were quite nice, refined cars, but also that they handled and rode really well. And it has that feel which you just don't get on modern cars now. It's a feeling of lightness. Modern cars are so heavy that you don't get that. Now the steering, as far as I'm aware, it's unassisted, but it's nice and light and crisp. And the car almost floats over the road. It reminds me of some of the French cars, but just with a little bit more composure on the chassis. It's just light on its feet. It's nice, it's crisp, it's lovely. Everything on it seems really well judged. The weight of the controls, from the throttle to the weight of the steering to the way it responds. Steering isn't super quick, but I think it's well judged for the car. The seats are very comfortable. Although it has to be said that the driver's one in particular, with only 70,000 miles, has worn quite badly. And I think you can see that this material, I don't know, it's a kind of vela, but it feels thin. So I'm not surprised it's worn through. And it does show unwelcome signs that there were some elements of the car where the build quality and the materials used weren't up to scratch. And that's a shame, because the dash is really elegant. I mean, the materials are it's all cheap plastic, but the design is really nice. And it has the way that the gears, normally they're on the gear knob there. I think there are a few cars where this has happened, but not many. They have the gear selector pattern on the dash there. I really like that. It's pretty unusual. And then of course, the Fiat twin cam is lovely. 1.4 isn't the ideal option. Really, you'd want a 1.8 or the 2 litre. But because the car's quite light and because it's quite good with 90 horsepower, I think it's not going to feel too bad. Let's just see. I mean, it is slow, I'm not going to lie to you. It's 90 horsepower and it's still quite a large car. But the fact that it moves at all and it doesn't feel super sluggish, I think is quite an achievement. For a poverty spec car, it's nice that it still has a rev counter, and being a Fiat twin cam, it is still quite nice and revvy. But I think that where this excels is just in the ride handling compromise. It's very well set up for a chassis of this age. You know, it feels like a more modern car, and I think that for the early 70s, it would have been a revelation just how good it is, which makes it so much more of a shame that it all went so terribly wrong. One thing I do want to mention that I'm not a massive fan of this particular variant, the original, the main car, the Saloon, is this sort of quasi-hatchback setup. It's not actually a hatchback, it has a proper boot, but I just don't think, I never liked it, even from when I remember seeing these when I was a kid in the 80s, when there was a few still around. And that rear profile, that little sort of hunchback that it has, I just didn't think it was that elegant. I don't think it was the prettiest car. Now, of course, there was the coupe, which was much nicer looking, the quite visionary sports station wagon, the HB, and the Monte Carlo was a whole other thing. They all looked better than this, but I don't know. I wasn't that sure about it. Maybe in the 70s, of course, the designs were different then and it would have looked quite sort of forward-facing, but I still don't think it's the prettiest car ever made. Now let's get back to this rust issue and to what eventually killed off the Beta, or the Beta as you would say it in Italian. Now, there were stories running rampant. By 1980, I think the Daily Mail picked it up, then ITV ran some stories on it. And that was well after the story started circulating about this problem of these failing the MOT because the front subframe was going. what would happen is that the engine would drop a couple of inches, but there were stories of engines completely dropping out of the cars. That was simply not true. It was folklore. It was never going to be outright dangerous in that way, but of course, if the front subframe started rotting, the car would fail its MOT, which is a serious thing. Now, what Lancia could have and should have done is immediately address this problem. Instead, they just kind of let it fester for years until it was too late. By the time it hit the headlines, it got into the news, they reacted by starting to recall cars. They were offering people swaps. So you'd bring your car and you'd get a very generous trade-in to buy another Fiat Lancia product. What they should have done from the very beginning, 1980 was too late. That was 8 years after the car was released. The damage had already been done. The way that subframe is designed holds water. And also, to be fair, it was thin. It wasn't great quality metal. So, you know, it was something that was always going to happen. But if they'd grasped the problem straight away, they could have dealt with it. Look at Mercedes in the 2000s. They made some terribly built cars. They rusted everywhere. They were absolutely awful. The quality was low as well. But their marketing, their PR, the way they handled that situation, it seems to have hardly affected them at all. Lancia, on the other hand, had a lot of big problems, including that the dealerships weren't very good. But it was a company level as well that there was a problem, so they never dealt with the main issue. Instead, they took all these cars back and they crushed them as well, which wasn't necessarily the right thing to do. They could have just recalled them and sorted out the rear subframe mounts. That was more than possible. They also allowed voices to circulate saying that Italian cars were built with Russian steel, so that the poor quality Russian recycled steel could be blamed for what was happening to the cars. That was convenient in a way, because you didn't have to face up to the fact that A, maybe you'd got something wrong, but B, that the way the cars was being built, because it wasn't just the subframe, you know, they just weren't being built well enough, they weren't rust-proofed well enough. Then you don't blame the factory. It's not that Lancia isn't building cars as well as it should. Oh, it's down to this foreign, nasty Soviet product. But that had unintended consequences as well, because that was something that then lived on with Italian cars for years and years, that they were just built with this poor quality steel and they rusted worse than anything else. And in truth, it really didn't. Most of them rusted pretty much the same as all other cars. They rusted pretty badly. That's what cars were like in that era. So to sum up, they built a brilliant car. This really is good. As I've been driving and talking to you, I've been driving it. It's so nice, even through the tighter bends there. It handles really tidily. So they built a brilliant car. I'd say the best in its class. But then it all went wrong, and yes, they did make some mistakes, but it could have been saved. Instead, because of terrible PR, but also because their dealerships weren't very good, it all fell apart. Now, to give you an idea on the dealerships, this particular car was bought, there's a sticker on the back, and it was bought from that dealer originally. Now, if you look at the name of it, it's a depot. They also sell trucks and so on. Just gives you an idea. Already by this stage, the Germans had worked really hard to have a good dealer network, which was so important, especially if you're selling a top end or a higher end car like the Lancia was supposed to be. Lancia never did that. It had disjointed dealerships, bad communication, and it wasn't the dealers themselves, it's just that the back home, Fiat Lancia back home, just didn't invest in their dealers. So that was the other big thing. Now, so incredibly few of these cars have survived that if you want to go and have a look today and see what there is, I was surprised to see that there's 2 on the market in the UK. So if you wanted to get one, it's not impossible, and there's a few more abroad. But what you will see is that the coupes and the HPEs, the station wagons, or the estates, I always get told off for saying station wagon, or the estate, the performance estate, they are much more prevalent. And it seems for some reason, I don't know if that subframe was different or what was different, but they seem to have survived a lot better than the Saloons. So if you're going to buy one, you're more likely to find one of those. But it's the rarity factor of these Saloons which is really interesting. Now, if you enjoyed this, do have a look at the video that I did a couple of years ago on the myth of the Russian steel story, because it is fascinating to find out how that came about, why it came about, and actually the truth of why these cars actually rusted and what truly happened. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to Fred, who brought down the beta today. I've been trying to get hold of one for ages. So thanks all of you. Thanks Fred, and see you for the next video.